Now we're going to do the big one? Okay. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 192 to prohibit individuals who are not citizens of the United States from voting in elections in the District of Columbia. The clerk will please report the bill.
H.R. 192, a bill to prohibit an individual who is not a U.S. citizen from voting in any election in the District of Columbia.
Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for an amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will please report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 192 as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.
Without objection, the amendment is considered as read, and the substitute will be considered as original text for the purposes of further amendment. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes for a statement on the bill and the amendment. Since the voters entrusted Republicans with control of the House, this committee has conducted long overdue oversight of our nation's capital city by convening 3 hearings on the District of Columbia. Our most recent D.C. hearing, held jointly with the Committee on House Administration, examined the topic of election integrity in the district. On November 21, 2022, the district government enacted the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act, allowing non-citizen residents to vote in D.C. local elections. This includes illegal immigrants and even foreign diplomats whose interests may be opposed to the interest of Americans. This radical change to our election laws upset lawmakers on both sides of the aisle. D.C. Mayor Bowser withheld her signature on the act, something she has done only a handful of times. On February 9, 2023, 260 members of the House voted to overturn the D.C. Act through a resolution of disapproval, which I sponsored. In that vote, I was happy to see committee colleague, Representative Jared Moskowitz, join 41 other House Democrats in voting to block this D.C. law. However, this bipartisan resolution of disapproval was not considered in the Senate, so D.C.'s non-citizen voting law has gone into effect. This is unacceptable. The only factor that differentiates American citizens from non-citizens is the right to vote. D.C. residents should be confident that their local government is not being diluted by lawful non-citizen residents or illegal immigrants. Article 1 of the Constitution grants Congress exclusive jurisdiction over the nation's capital. And the House rules charge the Oversight Committee with a duty to oversee the municipal affairs of the District of Columbia. I urge my colleagues to support Representative Pfluger's common sense bill to ensure that only U.S. citizens have the right to vote in local D.C. elections and repeal D.C.'s radical law. I now recognize the ranking member for his statement.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I would retitle this bill the Insult to Injury Bill. The injury begins with the massive and globally unique disenfranchisement of the residents of the federal capital city. The United States is the only democratic nation on earth which disenfranchises the people who live in the capital city, which means that there are 700,000 tax-paying, draftable American citizens who've participated in every war that America's ever fought, beginning with the American Revolution, and yet are denied voting representation both in the House of Representatives and in the United States Senate. But it's not enough for Mr. Pfluger and our friends in the GOP to deny 700,000 fellow citizens equal voting rights and representation in Congress. Now they have to deny D.C. even the right to decide who's going to vote in their local elections, because that's all we're talking about, who's going to vote for school board and advisory neighborhood commission, and who's going to vote for city council and mayor. There's one federal representative from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton, the distinguished non-voting delegate from the District of Columbia. And under the legislation that H.R. 192 would repeal in D.C., the local population does not vote, even for the non-voting delegate, as I understand it. In any event, the non-voting delegate, by definition, doesn't get to vote in Congress. And so this is just pretty much a symbolic effort to add insult to injury. It so happens, if you actually do any research on this, that the vast majority of states permitted non-citizens to vote for most of American history. most of the states represented in this committee allowed non-citizens to vote at the local level. Many of them allowed it even at the state and federal level. But when the Republic began, the relevant suffrage restrictions were based on wealth, property, race, and gender. And if you were a propertied white man, you could vote regardless of what your citizenship was. Your citizenship was considered completely irrelevant to it. And this primarily became an issue during the Civil War, where it was the Republican Party which championed non-citizen voting, which is why a number of newspapers in the South attacked Abraham Lincoln as an alien president, saying that he was carried to victory on the strength of the immigrant vote in New York and Illinois and in other states. The southern states opposed immigrant suffrage because they felt that immigrants were coming over to America with radical ideas against slavery, as Lincoln defended the practice of non-citizen voting. In any event, nothing remotely so controversial as what the Republican Party of the 19th century endorsed is going on in D.C. They're just talking about allowing people to vote in school board elections. Now, our friends have made a big deal out of diplomatic personnel from China and Russia, and perhaps Chinese spies like the one who apparently was going to be the star witness for the majority in their continuing efforts to find something on Joe Biden. These people theoretically would be allowed to vote. If you want to go after those people, well, then say that diplomatic personnel and Chinese spies shouldn't be allowed to vote. But if they're talking about, I don't know, 80,000 or 70,000 people, I don't know how many people exactly are affected by it, voting in their local school board elections, it's a very different matter than allowing diplomatic personnel from Russia or China, where conceivably there's some kind of federal interest, although it hasn't been identified or elucidated, at least to my satisfaction, what that might be. So what's this really about? It's just about kicking around the people of Washington, D.C. I don't think we've had any hearings about how we can actually assist the people of Washington in any of their efforts to deal with the problems there, including the problem of gun violence, as guns continue to pour into Washington, D.C., like other big cities across the country. If we want to actually help people in Washington, why don't we start by adopting the proposal which is advanced and endorsed by more than 90% of the American people, a universal violent criminal background check. Why don't we close the internet loophole? Why don't we close the private gun show loophole? There are things that we can do to help Washington, along with other big cities that exist in all of our states, but this is not one of them. This is obviously a cheap shot against the people of Washington who've decided to use their very limited democratic rights to extend rights to people who live in the city. With that, I yield back to you, Mr. Chairman.
Do any other members wish to be heard? Ms. Norton is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I strongly oppose this undemocratic, paternalistic bill. This Congress, House Republicans have become obsessed with overturning the District of Columbia's election laws. They have already introduced 17 bills that would do so, yet they refuse to do the one and only thing D.C. residents have asked them to do about elections in D.C., which is to give D.C. residents voting representation in the House and Senate, as well as full control over their local affairs by passing the D.C. statehood bill. It is true that Congress has the constitutional authority to legislate on local D.C. matters, but it is false that Congress has a constitutional duty to do so. Instead, legislating on local D.C. matters is a choice. D.C. residents, a majority of whom are black and brown, are capable and worthy of governing themselves. I remind my Republican colleagues who claim to revere the founders what James Madison said in Federalist 43 about the residents of the federal district, and I quote him, "A municipal legislature for local purposes derived from their own suffrages will, of course, be allowed them, end quote. The Supreme Court has held that Congress may delegate full legislative power, their words, full legislative power to D.C. on local D.C. matters. Last year, the D.C. Council passed the Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act of 2022, which allows non-citizens to vote, but only in local D.C. elections. This year, the House passed a disapproval resolution that would have nullified this legislation, but the Senate never took it up. The Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act of 2022 is now law, and it should remain law. The Local Resident Voting Rights Amendment Act of 2022 only applies to local, and I stress local, D.C. elections. But there is a long history in the United States of allowing non-citizens to vote in local, state, territorial, and federal elections. At various points, 40 states have permitted non-citizens to vote. For example, Texas, the home state of the sponsor of H.R. 192, and Kentucky, the home state of the chair of this committee, used to allow non-citizens to vote. Today, more than a dozen municipalities allow non-citizens to vote in local, and I stress local, elections. The D.C. Council has 13 members. The members are elected by D.C. residents. If D.C. residents do not like how members vote, they can vote them out of office. Congress has 535 voting members. The members are elected by residents of their states. None are elected by D.C. residents. If D.C. residents do not like how the members vote, they cannot vote them out of office. The Revolutionary War was fought to give consent to the governed and to end taxation without representation. Yet D.C. residents cannot consent to any actions taken by Congress, including H.R. 192, and pay full federal taxes. Indeed, D.C. residents pay more federal taxes per capita than residents of any state, and more total federal taxes than 19 states, while being denied voting representation in Congress. I urge members to vote no on this bill, and I urge this committee to keep its hands off D.C. and pass the D.C. statehood bill instead. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Chair recognizes Mr. Garcia for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to note that so far in this Congress, in this committee, we have had 12 hearings of this full body total. Of those, 3 of them in its entirety have been devoted to the District of Columbia. So 1/4 of all of the hearings that we have had in this body have been about Washington, D.C., the District of Columbia. Now, that's more attention that we have spent on any other single issue in this full oversight committee, and it's not even close. Not government operations, not national security, not the federal workforce, not health care, all topics that are the jurisdiction of this committee in part. So we've spent more time instead on the District of Columbia. And I think that tells you everything about the priorities that are here in this Republican majority. We have real serious challenges that are facing our country, pressing issues that deserve the attention of this body. But instead of doing that work, our constituents sent here to accomplish, we've devoted 25% of our time to essentially have Washington, D.C. be the political punching bag of this committee. It's transparent, and quite frankly, it should be embarrassing to this committee. This bill is just another opportunity for far-right House Republicans to trample on the fundamental rights of 700,000 people, create fear, and pander to an extremist base. They don't care about election integrity any more than they pretend to care about crime in our hearings earlier this year. And if they did, we'd be reviewing bills to strengthen campaign finance laws or invest in preventing foreign interference in our elections. But this is not about solutions. Obviously, this committee is about just attacking Washington, D.C. over and over and over again. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again. The House majority members of this committee, if they're really that interested in Washington, D.C., they should run for the Washington, D.C. City Council or even mayor. It's a great job. I've done it before, and that's really the forum for these discussions about Washington, D.C. And I'm just curious also, we have already held 1/4 of our hearings about Washington, and I'm wondering, Mr. Chairman, should we expect more hearings about Washington, D.C. as part of this committee?
Well, let me correct you. We've had, counting our subcommittees, which we said was going to be a very substantive part of this committee process, we've had around 60 committee hearings total. And we've discussed a lot of things from cybersecurity to pharmacy benefit managers. So I think we've had a pretty substantive committee schedule, and I would welcome you to compare our first 6 months to the first 6 months of my predecessor's Oversight Committee schedule and the topics that have been discussed.
Well, sir, I appreciate that. But the truth is, we've had 12 full hearings of the Oversight Committee where all members...
Well, we do work in subcommittees as well.
Absolutely, sir. And I think it's interesting, though, of the 12 full hearings we've had of this committee, 25% of them, more than any other single topic, have been about the District of Columbia, a majority black and brown city of which people are disenfranchised by not having the fundamental rights to vote for representation. And so, to me, that's something that is transparent, and it's outrageous, quite frankly. And so I'm hoping that that 25% number gets reduced. And in closing, we should also, the name of this committee, quite frankly, should be the House Oversight Committee on the District of Columbia. And with that, I yield back the rest of my time.
The gentleman yield.
Let me just reiterate the point that our conference is serious about not letting non-citizens vote. We don't want this to be a trend across America. We want to respect our election integrity. And this is an important issue, as is crime. And the crime rate in Washington, D.C. is out of control. And when we have to step in, we will do that. That's our granted in the Constitution. We will continue to do that. I wish we didn't have to do that. But we are opposed to letting non-citizens vote. That is a very important part of our platform.
I've yielded to Mr. Raskin.
Thank you for yielding. The first point I'd like to make is that gun violence is crime. Some people talk about crime and hope that it evokes images that don't relate to the massacres that are taking place across the country in churches, synagogues, Walmarts, grocery stores, everywhere you turn. But the second thing is, if we're really concerned about the influence of non-citizens, a much bigger problem would be non-citizen ownership of private stock in U.S. corporations. And I wonder how our colleagues feel about that. Would you be interested in a ban on non-citizens owning stock in large corporations that have power in our country? That's a much bigger threat than some non-citizens in Washington, D.C., a voteless colony, essentially, being able to vote for an advisory neighborhood commissioner.
I would like to see if the ranking member would yield to a question with respect to gun violence. What good does it do to pass more gun laws when white privileged children of high-ranking elected officials can simply get their gun violations waived and others have to serve prison time? I mean, I don't think it's equal justice here with respect to the gun laws that are on the books. I think we need to focus on the gun laws that are on the books first before we look at other gun laws.
Well, Hunter Biden is being prosecuted for his gun offenses, and I'm all for that. Are you opposed to him being prosecuted?
Hunter Biden is not going to pay any price for his violation of gun laws, which you all have written, the gun laws which you all have written, but yet you go to the prison system in Kentucky, and it's full of people who have been imprisoned for violation of gun laws, for possession of illegal drugs, And I don't think that that's fair, and that's why there are certain conservatives like me that were open to the criminal justice reform, because we believe that it's been racial in nature when you look at the prison system in America and the number of people who have been incarcerated that are minorities for simple things like possession of illegal drugs and possession of illegal firearms. But then you see the president's son get by without anything. And I'm not even going to get into the tax evasion and the being unregistered foreign agent, and the list goes on and on with money laundering, racketeering.
In supporting decriminalization of marijuana then?
I've always been that way.
Nationwide, because that's something we could do.
I've been that way forever.
Well, let's work on that. That's something concrete and bipartisan we could do that will end a war on many communities in America. And I think we could get the support for that, certainly on my side of the aisle. I hope we could get it on your side. And I would pledge to work with you on that. But I think that we need much more aggressive enforcement of the gun laws we've got. I'm glad that Hunter Biden was indicted for his gun offenses. And some people think there should be no gun laws at all. And I take it you're agreeing with me that there should be gun laws. In order to promote
But you all
gun
wrote
safety.
the gun laws, but then
Well,
people
no,
like
actually,
Hunter
the
Biden
NRA
don't have to pay the price, but minorities
The
do.
NRA.
If Hunter Biden, I just wonder if Hunter Biden's last name weren't Biden, and if he weren't a Caucasian, where he would be right now with just that gun law, the gun law.
Let me just say one thing about the gun laws. The National Rifle Association used to be in favor of common sense gun safety laws until it was turned into a political instrument to try to divide and polarize America. And it has succeeded, unfortunately, in doing so. But 90% of the American people think that we should close all of these loopholes and that everybody who purchases a gun should have a background check. I hope you would agree with me on that.
I believe that you all are being very hypocritical on the gun laws that are already on the books. And the topic of this debate was whether or not illegals should vote in elections. And that is something that our side of the aisle is firm in being against. And quite frankly, a pretty good percentage of your side of the aisle will vote for this bill on the floor as well.
And there's a strong argument that people who are here on an undocumented basis should not be able to purchase guns and should not be able to vote.
We believe that people who are here illegally shouldn't be here, period.
Yeah, and we should
We
stop
believe
them
in
from
securing the
purchasing
border.
guns,
But
right?
anyway, well, I'm going to get back to the topic. I think the gentleman's time's expired. Any other members wish to speak? Ms. Norton, did you finish? Are you good?
I'm fine, Mr. Chairman.
All right, good deal.
I just had one last question, Mr. Chairman.
Who am I here? Who's here? Mr. Kassar. I think your time's expired, but I'll grant you.
Oh, my time for the whole hearing expired. Got it. I just want to thank you for granting it. You just had mentioned you were correcting Mr. Garcia that we haven't spent 25% of our full committee hearings on D.C., but you said you were correcting that, but is it the case that it's a different number? Is it 25% or is it a different percentage of our full committee hearings have been dedicated to D.C.?
And I just have to say, since you keep bringing up the D.C. point, we invited the D.C. mayor to come here. We weren't critical. We were looking for opportunities to work together, and I think that there are opportunities where we can work together.
I thought it was
I think we were very cordial to the D.C. mayor, and that's always been a practice of this committee to have the D.C. mayor come and be treated with cabinet secretary status.
No, I thought it was a good hearing. You had mentioned you were correcting Mr. Garcia about the percentage of hearings of this full body that have been dedicated to D.C. I have not kept track. He said it was 25% of our full committee hearings. Has it been 25% of our full committee hearings are dedicated to D.C.?
Does any other member wish to be heard?
Well, I suppose that that number is correct then.
Did you yield back?
I yield back to
Okay,
the
all
ranking
right,
member.
good deal. The question is now on the amendment in the nature of a substitute. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chairs, the ayes have it. The amendment.
Mr. Chairman, I ask for a recorded vote on.
Okay, you mean on the next one? We got one, that was on the amendment. We'll do the full bill now. Okay, right. The question is now on favorably reporting H.R. 192 as amended. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed signify by saying no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, a recorded vote was requested by Ms. Norton, so as previously announced, further proceedings on the question will be postponed. All right. Which one? Okay. Our next item for consideration is H.R. 3358, Mission Not Emissions Act. The clerk will please report the bill.
H.R. 3358, Mission Not Emissions, a bill to prohibit any requirement for recipients of federal contracts to disclose greenhouse gas emissions and climate-related financial risk and for other purposes.
Without objection, the bill shall be considered as read and open for amendment at any point. Without objection, so ordered. The chair recognizes himself to offer an amendment in the nature of a substitute. The clerk will please report the amendment.
An amendment in the nature of a substitute to H.R. 3358 as offered by Mr. Comer of Kentucky.